was? Very good. To whom was the book written?
12 scattered tribes.
12 scattered tribes, which were? Messianic Jews. So they were Jews who had a saving faith in Jesus Christ. And in general, something I said about them, it's kind of important for us to, when they of modest means. They didn't have much money. Yeah, very good. And why did James write his book?
They were spiritually immature.
Spiritually immature. And what's the Greek word that means mature or perfect? Yeah, whole, adult, complete. And you'll see it several times in the book of James. And we're going to jump in to the first part of chapter 1, verses 1 to 8. So how many marks of a mature Christian are there? 5. And what's the first one?
Patient in testing.
He or she is patient in testing. And the first 8 verses talk about turning trials into triumphs. Yeah. Who would like to read? Maddie Kate. Yeah, but if you could read this, can you? Yeah, do you mind?
James, servant of God of the Lord Jesus Christ, the 12 tribes of the virgin greetings. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy. Because you know that the testing.
Wait, say it again. Say it again.
Consider it nothing but joy.
Okay.
Because you know the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let the endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all that they do.
All right. Has anybody ever seen a bumper sticker or heard the expression, if life gives you lemons,
Lemonade.
squeeze those lemons and make lemonade? My daughter, Lena, she's the one who did most of the PowerPoints for me, and I taught this class in French for the first time a few weeks ago, and she put in a different image, and it said, it was in English because she thought it was funny, and I didn't see it, and it said, if life gives you lemons, squirt somebody in the eye, and I was like, no, that's not how that goes. Wrong. Yeah. So it's a cute little expression, and you can hear it and go, yeah, that sounds good. But actually, it's very biblical to take the lemons that life gives you and squeeze them and make some really good lemonade out of them.
Take sour things, like why lemons?
You don't eat lemons by themselves, but you do drink lemonade. So it's that the thought behind it is that I have a condition. It's called candida, and the fruit that I was allowed to eat for a year were olives, avocados, lemons, and limes. Those are the only fruits that I got. Anyway, but so you wouldn't say, oh yay, I get to eat lemons for dessert, which it is a fruit. So basically saying something that is bitter and not agréable, not nice to eat in and of itself, but you take that and you turn it into something beautiful and refreshing and palpable for your taste buds. And the thing about the Bible is this is like very biblical, because all throughout the Bible we see people who got handed lemons. I mean, like buckets and buckets of lemons, and they turned those difficult situations into something beautiful and glorifying to God. Examples. Do you have any examples of people who got lemons in life in the Bible? Paul. Yeah. How so? How did he turn those lemons into?
He experienced like beatings, thorn in the flesh, shipwrecks, persecution, stonings, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And yet he
Yeah, and he wrote about that, and we still have what happened, all the lemons that he got, we have it today, and we're encouraged by his faith walk. Yeah. Who else? Job, man, that's not buckets, it's like bushels of lemons, man. Probably the person the most synonymous with suffering and trials in the entire Bible is Job. And James, we'll see later in chapter 5, he talks about Job, about the suffering of Job. Who else? What about Joseph? Yeah, he got hated on by his brothers. I mean, probably not the wisest way to say things to your brothers, but he got hated on by his brothers, got hated on by Potiphar's wife, and each time by the grace of God, he was able to turn those difficult experiences into something glorifying to God. And so all throughout the Bible, we see people that instead of becoming victims, they were victors in their situation. And basically, James says that we can have the same experience today, no matter what our trials, no matter what our challenges, no matter what our situations are. And especially chapter 1, verses 1 to 8. Through faith in Christ, we can experience victory, and the result of that victory will be, teleos, will be maturity in Christ, spiritual maturity. So, if we want to turn our trials into triumph, we need to progress towards 4 biblical imperatives that we find in these first 8 verses. And we're going to spend some time looking at these 4 verbs because it's really important whenever we find ourselves in difficult situations to remember what James is encouraging his readers to do, but also encouraging us to do. And I think that we will, if we haven't already found ourselves in difficult situations, we will in the near future. So 4 biblical imperatives, and it's 4 verbs. And we're going to go over them in just a little while, but it's count, know, allow, and ask. So count, know, allow, and ask. And to put it another way, these 4 essentials for victory in trials are a joyful attitude, an understanding mind, a surrendered will, and a heart that wants to believe. All right, so first one. 4 essentials for turning our trials into triumphs. Count. Chapter 1, verse 2. I read this somewhere and I think it's very appropriate. Outlook determines outcome. Outlook determines outcome. The way you perceive a situation will have a huge impact on the way the situation will finish itself out. Outlook determines outcome, and attitude, the attitude that you adopt going through any kind of situation will have an effect on the action that you take as you're in this difficult situation. So outlook determines outcome, and attitude determines action. And the interesting thing here in chapter 1, verse 2, what is the conjunction that James uses? Chapter 1, verse 2. Come on. What? Whenever. It's not if you experience trials, but whenever. When you experience trials and difficult situations. So as Christians, here we go. Here's the important information. As Christians, we should not be surprised when we find ourselves in difficult situations. If you've bought into the prosperity gospel, believe in Jesus, God's going to bless me, life's going to be rosy, today's the day to put that aside. As Christians, we should never be surprised when we find ourselves in difficult situations, and when we face adversity. He doesn't say if, he says when. Now, corollary, in French we say entre parenthèses, so in parentheses, sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations because of our own sin or because of our own bad choices. But sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations when we're tracking with the Lord, when things are going well, when we're on fire, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in difficult situations. So sometimes difficult situations because of our bad choices, because of our sinful nature. But sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations when we're doing everything that's zwischen Klammern, so in quotes, right. And so, chapter 1, verse 2, whenever we find ourselves in difficult situation, what's the verb? What's the imperative? What does James say to his readers, and what is he saying to us? What do you got to do?
No.
Well, before that, actually before. Count or consider. So the word in Greek, it's a financial term, and so it means to evaluate or consider in the light of what God is doing for us. So, how do we do that? Here's an image. So this is a tapestry. I know that gu. What is gu? Ugh. When like your style, but it's not taste. When your taste is maybe y'all don't think that's a beautiful tapestry, but somebody does. I'm hoping somebody in this room thinks that is just a beautiful tapestry. So you got this beautiful tapestry, and that's the front side. But on the back side, it's just a big jumble of knots and string. And the back side it ain't pretty. But the finished rug, for some people, would be a masterpiece if you're into tapestries. I don't know. I got this example out of a book. I'm trying to make it work. But it does work. You got this beautiful rug. But then on the back side, it's just knots and strings, and it's all emmêlé, it's all mixed up. And we don't concentrate on the back side, we concentrate on the front side, the beauty that glorifies God. And so we can't judge the worker by the work that's done by looking at the wrong side of the tapestry. Because if you look at the wrong side of the tapestry, you're going to be like, whoa, man, it's just a big mess. Well, the Christian life is sometimes a big mess. Quite complicated. Trials, tribulations, difficult stuff. But we need to take a bigger, we need to be able to take a look at our trials in the light of the bigger picture, meaning the whole tapestry, not just the back side of the tapestry. Man, this is awful. But look at the big picture and see the beauty that God is bringing about in our lives in these difficult situations. Okay, I have a story. It's kind of it's a little graphic, but it gets the point across as far as the main person in this story, about how her outlook determined the outcome and how she perceived the beauty of a really awful situation, and in the end, God was glorified. So, story of adversity. Liana Lay. A 12-year-old girl named Liana Lay, she lay on the side of the road, barely clinging to life. 2 men brutally raped the poor girl and left her for dead. Her face and neck were mutilated in the attack, the scars of which would remain for a lifetime. She thought for sure her life was over, that she never again would feel happiness or peace or any semblance of normality. The doctor encouraged Leanna to have an abortion, telling her it was the right thing to do so she wouldn't be haunted by a constant reminder of the attack. But even as a traumatized 12-year-old girl who had experienced some of the worst this world had to offer, Leanna understood just how precious life is. So this young girl asked her doctor one important question. She asked him, would an abortion ease her pain and help her forget about her rape? And her doctor said no. Liana knew that she would keep the baby. And so, instead, she rejected an abortion despite the doctor's suggestions. And as an adult, she said, in my situation, 2 lives were saved. I saved my daughter's life, but she saved mine. And so her outlook, even in the worst, I mean, I can't even imagine all the things that this 12-year-old girl went through. And she had the presence of mind to say, okay, if I get an abortion, is this going to change anything that's happened to me? Is it going to change all the awful, terrible things that I felt? And the doctor, in honesty, said no. And so she said, okay, I'm going to keep the baby. And in the end, because she had an eternal perspective, even as a 12-year-old child, she was able to say 2 lives were saved. I saved my daughter's life, but she saved mine. How can we have a joyful attitude when we're in the midst of trials? That sounds so counterintuitive, right? How is it possible? And it's not if you think you might can. It says count it all as joy. It's an imperative. When you're in a difficult situation, count it all as joy. How in the world is it possible for us as believers in Jesus Christ to count it all as joy when we're in difficult situations? Our values determine our evaluation. It's just, I like alliteration. So you'll see a lot of things that we do studying James is alliteration. Our values determine our evaluation of any given situation. What does that mean? So, what do y'all value in life? What are things that you value? Relationships. Family. Time. Yeah, that's a good one. What else do you value? Pets. Why not? Yeah. Health. It's a big one, man. It's a big one. Y'all are young, but let me tell you. Good health is a blessing. So, our values determine our evaluation. So here's the deal. If we value comfort more than character, we will find ourselves very upset when we're experiencing trials. So if we value comfort more than we value the character that God is growing in us, we will find ourselves very, very upset, very bothered whenever we experience trials. If we value the material and the physical more than the spiritual, it'll be impossible for us to count it all as joy. If we value the material, the physical, more than we value the spiritual, then it will be next to impossible for us to consider all the trials and tribulations that we experience in life, consider it with a joyful attitude. If we live only for the present and forget about the future, then trials will make us bitter and not better. I'll say it again. If we only live for the present and forget about the future, then trials will make us bitter, not better. So, what is it? Do you value comfort more than character? Do you value the material, physical more than the spiritual? Do you value the present more than the future? If it's the case, then when you go through trials, you're not going to be able to consider it all as joy. It will be next to impossible. So, whenever the trials come, James says whenever, not if, whenever the trials come, we can give thanks to the Lord and adopt an attitude of joy. It's possible. And it's not, these are not the joys you're looking for. Okay, I'm going to be joyful. I'm not going to look at anything that's going on in my terrible situation. No, we're not hypnotizing ourselves and trying to make ourselves think this is great. No, it's not great. Trials are never great, but in the end, if we value the spiritual more than the material or physical, we're going to see that there's worth in it, and we will be able to adopt an attitude of joy. And so when we look at trials through the eyes of faith, all the while looking to adopt an attitude of joy. So that sounds very theoretical, right? Because I'm saying that and you're like, okay, yeah. I can intellectually adhere to the idea, but it still doesn't get me there. Me, anyway. Because if I'm counting, okay, yeah, great. I'm in a terrible situation. I'm going to adopt a joyful attitude, but I think the second essential helps us get a little further to understanding how we can adopt an attitude of joy whenever we find ourselves in difficult situations. So the second imperative that James gives us is to know. Verse 3, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. So, what do Christians know that make it a little easier for us to be able to face trials and benefit from them and not just be, this sucks? What do we know as Christians that helps us to be able to face our trials and in the end actually benefit from them? What do we know? Because he says, know. Know what? God is with us. And what is he telling us, James? So we know that God is with us. And if God is with us, then what does that sous-entendre? What does that imply? What does that imply? If God is with us in this awful situation, what does that imply for us, Sam?
We'll be with God in the end.
We'll be with God. Well, what about this situation now, though? If God is with us in this situation, what does that imply? Come on, what? He's handling it.
He will work through it.
Yes. And so, if he's working through it, whatever I'm going through, this is not for nothing. There is a point to all this mess that I'm going through. There is a point. Because, Sam, God is with me. And if he's with me, then he is making sure that this is worth it. Worth it so that, main theme of James, worth it to what point? What's the main theme of James? That God's growing me in this terrible, awful situation that I'm in. It's not for nothing. And God is using this. He's allowing this test so that the best in us can come out. So, all right. Does anybody know what this is? I asked in Ravencrest, because I taught this class last week, and I was like, do you know what this is? Can anybody tell what that is?
Gold.
Yes, thank you. They're like, granola? And I was like, oh my gosh, you people from Colorado, you're so granola. Granola, no, it is little gold chips. So here's the image. So say that we are mining for gold. It is very difficult, laborious, demands a lot of patience, a lot of endurance. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. All of a sudden, this guy who's prospecting for gold, a.k.a. granola, is going to... Well, but it's just a little bit, you know? It's just a little bit. But he thinks, okay, man, this might be it. But there's also, is it bauxite that's fool's gold? I don't know, not important. I had geology like 25 years ago. So it could be fool's gold. So the guy who's digging for gold, he finds these little granola bits, and he takes them to the assayer's office, where they're the ones who can tell him if it's real or not. And that's the idea here. Whenever we're in trials and tribulations, this is like little bit of gold dust, little bit of bits of granola. Pyrite, thank you. Yes, but they're gonna take it to the assayer's office, and we're gonna wait to see what the assayer's office is. That's the person who says if it's real or not. And so, those bits of granola, is that worth a lot? It has very little value. But if he goes to the assayer's office and he finds out that it's real, what does that imply? What does that imply? There's more. There's a gold mine, and it's worth millions. Well, let's just say in my example, it's worth millions. Because the fact that it's real assures the prospector that he has a gold mine. And so, God's testing and consequent approval of our faith, because it assures us that our faith is genuine. It's the real deal. Gone through hell? made it through, Sam, because God was with you. Wasn't for nothing, because on the end, it's the real deal. Our faith is real, and it's worth a gold mine. Paul, he says it a little differently, but same idea. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Some of you are like, light? I've been through hell. I'm going to call my troubles light. But Paul is saying, in comparison, the terrible stuff that we're going through, or that we've been through, or that we will go through, it is nothing compared to the eternal glory that we will experience when our faith, these bits of testing and trial, and it's come out pure, and it's the real deal. It's a gold mine. And the gold mine is the eternal glory that will far outweigh anything that we've ever been through
Do you think that
in life.
that glory is, like, is it referring to us or is it referring to God?
Both. We'll see. Verse 12. We get the crown, but we throw our crowns at Jesus' feet anyway. So, yeah, we'll get some glory, but it's not about us in the end. It's about him. So, how can we have an attitude of joy? Knowing that our trials produce spiritual maturity. When I'm going through hard stuff, I can know that this is not for nothing. I know that God is using this in my life to grow me. And so God uses trials to grow our perseverance, our endurance, our patience. That's what James says. And he grows our character so that we become mature Christians. Part of my story. I grew up in West Texas. My dad, he was an insurance salesman. He grew up very poor on a cotton farm in Central Texas. He grew up very, very poor. And my dad was a workaholic. He was never around. He was an incredible athlete. He would have gone to the Olympics, but he got his girlfriend pregnant, and he got bleeding ulcers because of it. And so he didn't get to go to the Olympics. He was a really good athlete. And I was never as good an athlete as my dad. I mean, I was okay at stuff, but yeah. And as a child, I remember because in Texas you do the big three plus the other less important. So football, basketball, baseball. And I was 7 years old, and we went to a store called Strike It Rich. It had everything. Everything you can imagine was in this one store, Strike It Rich, before Walmart. And we got a baseball glove, and we put the cire, the wax. What do you say? No, what do you say? The wax?
I don't know. I'm guessing.
No, the oil that softens it up. Put it on the mattress, and a couple weeks later, he came home and he's like, "Okay, I have time now to throw the ball around." So he threw the ball around, and I was bad. I was fast. I was a really fast runner, but I was the tallest one in my class for a long time, and so I couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. And just hand-eye coordination just was a hard thing. And so we threw the ball, tried to throw the ball around for like 5 minutes, and after my dad was like, "Oh, yeah, it's fine." Yeah. And so we tried one more time, and it was kind of a catastrophe. And so we went to baseball practice for the first time, and the coach's name was Coach Slaughter, which is Coach Slaughter and his son Craig Slaughter, and I remember the coach said, "Let's see what you got," and I was like, "Well, I don't think I got much." And I remember the Craig, he threw he was 7, but I'm telling you, it was at least 90 miles an hour. He threw that baseball. So here I am, arm outstretched, didn't know how to catch a ball, and he throws it, and it hits me right in the nose. I remember. And so I didn't know this until later, but if you get hit in the nose, there's an automatic physical reaction that you start crying. And so I'm like trying to find I was clocked. And I'm looking for the ball. I have these tears coming down. I was like, I'm not crying. I don't know why I'm crying. But anyway, and I remember I finally found the ball, and I looked up, and my dad was standing next to the coach. And the look was somewhere between disappointment and disgust, or a mix between disappointment and disgust. And so I think for all of in my childhood, everything that I did, I was trying to get that, get a look of approval from my dad, get rid of that memory. I mean, I'm 54 and I still see exactly how my dad was looking at me when I was 7 years old. And so I think for a lot of my life as a child, my dad was absent, but I was hoping to be there and to make him proud, make him happy. And then I studied accounting. I was a CPA for Pricewaterhouse in Dallas because my dad told me you need to take the best job that pays the most. And it was a really high salary getting out of college, but I was basically a high-priced slave because they didn't pay overtime. And so I would work upwards from 80. One time I worked 104 hours in 1 week. Yeah, so it was hard. And so during that time, I had prayed that the Lord would show me what He wanted me to do. And I ended up in a home just for a year doing a short-term mission trip in France. I didn't speak French. And I learned French when I was there, and I thought it was only going to be for a year, but whole set of circumstances, I ended up in Bible school, and then I didn't want to be there, definitely didn't want to be there, and after I ended up becoming a missionary in France. I skipped a lot of steps, but coming back to my dad, so I met my wife at Bible school, we got married in Austria, and then we went to Texas to live there for 4 months. And so I remember the second conversation that I had with my dad when we got back, because I wanted my wife to be able to experience West Texas culture, meet my family and friends. And my dad said, "So how are you going to? What are you going to do? How are you going to take care of a wife, and if you have kids, how are you going to take care of your family?" And I remember I said, and it wasn't out of respect, but I just got back from Bible school, and I said with faith, I said, "Well, God's going to take care of us." And he just nodded his head and said, "Okay." And then a couple of weeks later, we had no money. We had enough money to pay our Bible school, just got married. We're going to do mission work, and we just didn't have any money. And so I called my dad up, who had become very, very wealthy. He was an insurance salesman, selling for all different kinds of companies, and money was his God. And so I remember I called him up after a couple of weeks. We didn't have any money in the bank, and I was like, "Hey, Dad, do you think you could spot me a couple $100?" And he said, "I thought your God was going to take care of you." It was a very, very hard thing, but it was one of the best things he could have said to me, because it's one thing to say, "God's going to take care of me," but then I'm going to depend on my father, who's loaded, to give me money whenever I need it. So after that, I never asked for my dad for money ever again, because if I'm going to say God's going to take care of me, then I better be living the reality that God is going to take care of me and not depend on my earthly father for anything. And so in 2017, my wife had told me, "You need to go back every year, once a year, so you have no regrets." My mother passed away when I was in it was 2007. And so I went back in June of 2017, and when I was there, through the Spirit's presence in my life, I knew I wasn't going to see my dad alive again. So I had a week with my dad, and I asked a lot of hard questions. It was a good time. We shared a lot, and I remember it was very important because I'd share the gospel time after time after time, but he had been baptized 3 times in 3 different churches in the South. It's the Bible Belt. Just everybody says they're a Christian. It's just very easy to say you're a Christian because there's a church on every street corner. And I'd shared the gospel, and I asked him, and he's like, "I prayed the prayer, and I've been baptized 3 times." 3 times, wow, insurance salesman. And so I said to him, "Is your will like you want it?" Because we talked about the will in the past, and he's like, "Yep." And then I looked at him. There was another time, and we were in the car, and I said, "Dad, are we good?" And there was a really long pause. In retrospect, I kind of understood why, but there was a really long pause, and he swallowed really hard, and he said, "We've always been good," which we didn't have a necessarily conflictual relationship. My mother always said, one continent is not enough for you and your dad. And so my dad's motto for me as a human was, all I want is for you to be happy. Which, if just parental advice whenever you have kids, please don't ever tell them that, because that puts an incredible amount of pressure on the child if their parent says, all I want for you to is be happy. Because you go through life thinking, all I have to do is be happy, and then I'm gonna make my dad happy. Close the parentheses. So a month later, we were in summer camp, and I got the call from my sister that my dad had passed away. And so I went back home, and I was talking to my sister. I only have one sister, and I said, I don't want there to be any problems as far as the will is concerned. And she looked at me and she said, oh, he didn't tell you. And I said, tell me what? And she said, you're not in the will. And I was needless to say, shocked. And it started a whole period of my life where I was not well. Just thinking through, I'm very analytical, and you do a flow chart. If this, then go here, and if no, then go here to figure out. And I couldn't figure out why my dad had disinherited me. At least I didn't know why. And I got stuck on the why question. And for like 6 months, I didn't sleep. And basically, my heart was broken, not because of the money, but because of what that said about our relationship. As a 7-year-old boy, seeing that look of disgust and disappointment, and at the end of my dad's life, getting disinherited, and it was like him saying, I don't choose you. And I felt like a loser. Like I couldn't even talk about it. And my heart was broken. And I had to go get help because I was in a very bad place. But in the end, God in His goodness, as I was going through not sleeping and trying to figure out why and what this said about me, God in His goodness, He was like, you've been preaching and teaching that the only eyes in the universe that matter are the eyes of your Heavenly Father, who when they look at you, they see you and they say with you, I'm well pleased. My faithful child, with you I am well pleased. And so in the end, after going through this very difficult situation, having my heart broken, God used it to grow me, to understand what it means to be loved unconditionally by the Creator of the universe, and understand just how important it is, not just for me, but for all of us, to know just how much we are loved. And in the end, if we're looking for approval from our parents or from our friends or from anybody else in the world, actually, in the end, the only approval that matters is the approval of our Heavenly Father, who says to us, when He sees us, He sees Jesus, and He says to us, with you, I am well pleased. So, what do we know that God produces in our lives as we go through those difficult situations? Perseverance, endurance, patience, according to James verse 3. And so then we move to the third imperative, or the third essential that helps us to turn our trials into triumphs. It's the verb allow. And let, so it's let in this version, NRSV. And let endurance have its full effect so that you may be mature, teleos, and complete, lacking in nothing. So here's the deal. God will not build our character without our cooperation. So when we're counting, okay, count it all as joy. This is a blessing because I know what? That this is not for nothing. In this situation, God is using this to grow me. And so I'm going to allow God to work in this terrible situation in my life. It would be a tragedy if children stayed babies. And here's the thing. Who in this room wants to stay a baby Christian? There's a link between living a sheltered life and not ever having to deal with hard stuff. I know a lot of Christians, and they're just protecting themselves from being in any kind of situation where things are going to get rough and tough and hard. But here's the deal. God is not going to grow us without our consent. God will not grow us without our consent. He's not going to be, and because the idea here is okay, I'm in a terrible situation. I'm just fix this. Just a baby throwing tantrums. And God's like, whenever children do throw tantrums, the parents are just like, okay, do your thing, because I'm not touching that. Whenever we're in difficult situations, God is asking us to cooperate with Him in those situations. So a submissive will is necessary for God to make changes in our hearts during trials. A submissive will is necessary for God to make changes in our hearts during trials. If we try to go through trials without surrendered wills, we'll end up like immature children having tantrums. One of the difficult stages of growing up for a baby is getting weaned. A baby who is getting weaned thinks that his mother hates him and is doing this terrible, terrible thing and having to eat nasty mush instead of getting pure, perfect mother's milk. But the thing is, getting weaned gives the child more freedom and gives the child more liberty and maturity. And it's good for a child to get weaned. And so God has to wean His own children, has to wean us away from our childish toys, and has to wean us away from our immature attitudes, i.e., I love Jesus, so everything needs to be perfect and good for me in this life. Really? Is that what the rest of the Bible teaches? I believe in Jesus, so God's going to bless me, and life's going to be rosy, life's going to be perfect. Well, that's not the human experience. And that's not a loving God reaction to little kids who need to be weaned, who need to grow up and put on big boy pants. And so He often uses trials to grow us and to mature us. And so we have to choose to surrender to His will. So the first three essentials for turning trials into triumphs. First, count it all as joy. Consider this situation, and whenever we're in trials. But to do that, we have to what? Know. What do we have to know? What do we need to know? This is not for nothing. God is using this. I need to know that. Because if I don't know it, then life's going to be hell. And then thirdly, whenever we're in those situations, we know that God is using it. And if He is using it, we allow Him to mature us and to grow our character and to transform us in these difficult situations. We have a surrendered will, accepting the discomfort of the testing. We allow God to use this situation, and we accept that, man, this is just really uncomfortable. We'll stop there before we come back. Actually, yeah, we'll stop now before we come to the fourth one. The fourth and last essential for us to be able to squeeze those lemons and turn them into lemonade. Is this the right time for a break? Yes? So we come back at 11.